What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're going to talk about the most well-documented ghost story in West Virginia, the Greenbrier ghost. So while the Greenbrier ghost might not be the most famous West Virginia ghost story, it is the most well-documented. Not because it was published in any book, but because it's recorded in official state court transcripts. It's oftentimes tossed around that in West Virginia there was once a ghost that convicted its own murderer, which is a catchy kind of headline, but it's not entirely true. The story all begins in 1897 when Lewisburg resident Elva Zana Hester Shue was found dead in her home. Her husband, Edward S. Shue, was immediately called, and as soon as he came home, found his dead wife. He then sent for a local doctor and coroner. While the doctor was on his way, he proceeded to move the body and place the body in a stiff collared dress, and the entire time the doctor was trying to do an examination of the body, he basically cradled the head, keeping it from moving in any way. The doctor noted that there was some bruising on the right side of the neck and the right side of the face, and whenever he tried to investigate further, Edward basically chased him off and he left. Eventually, the death of Elva Shue was deemed a heart attack, which is perfectly normal considering she was like 23 or 24 years old. Things only got weirder later on at her wake. During this point, Edward was highly protective of the body and would not allow people to get super close to it. He used a pillow and a rolled up sheet to kind of cushion the head and keep it from moving, along with wrapped a thick scarf around his wife's neck. Again, you can probably see from a mile away, there was something wrong with her neck that he knew about. Like, he's going to Weekend at Bernie's comedical extent to try and hide the fact there's something wrong with her neck. And unfortunately, people noticed this. Family members commented later that there seemed to be a looseness to her head, but she was buried, and that was the end of it. Story time over. No, actually, about a month later, Elva's mother went to the Lewisburg prosecutor and told him that after her daughter's burial, her spirit kept visiting her at night. In fact, at one point, the spirit visited her 4 nights in a row, at which point the ghost basically told her that her husband had killed her, her husband had broken her neck, and at one point, as the ghost was leaving the mother's bedroom, turned its head 180 degrees, like completely twisted its head around. Remember, he broke my neck, and the mom was like, yeah, I got you. She's like, okay, and just kind of disappeared. And the prosecutor didn't really believe a lot of it, but he did decide to gather up like a coroner report and some stuff like that. When he confronted the doctor that initially investigated the body, he found out that the doctor hadn't actually examined the body. So then he decided to do a little bit of a background investigation on Mr. Edward Shue. And it turns out that he was actually using a fake alias. His actual name was Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe. He had served time in the West Virginia penitentiary, and he had 2 previous wives, both that had died under mysterious circumstances. The prosecutor decided to go to the police and exhume the body. Basically dig up the body, see if they could find any sign of foul play. But before they could even do that, Mr. Shu, because I cannot pronounce his actual first name, and I will not call him Edward anymore, basically started protesting that they were not going to dig up his body, that they're not going to dig up her body. And then finally they told him that if he did not cooperate, they would place him under arrest, at which point, like, you'd think they already have this mountain of circumstantial evidence kind of forming around him. He just decided to declare, quote, "They will not be able to prove I did it." That is not something an innocent person says. They hadn't even dug up the body yet. They ended up digging up the body, and I'm going to read from the official autopsy report. The discovery was made that the neck was broken and the windpipe mashed. On the throat, there were marks of fingers indicating she had been choken. The neck was dislocated between the first and second vertebrae, the ligaments were torn and ruptured, and the windpipe had been crushed in from the front of the neck. Things aren't looking too good for Mr. Shu right now. He was placed under arrest. He was sent to the jail. Now, you'd think at this point he would, like, he has the right to remain silent. You'd think he would remain silent. While in prison, he told reporters that he wished to be married 7 times in total, and that the state didn't have enough evidence to convict him. Again, those aren't things that an innocent man should ever say. And those are especially things a man who is guilty should not ever say. But this is where things get super weird. But on the second day of the trial, the defense, Shu's lawyer, decided to cross-examine the mother, where the defense brought up the ghost. Because the prosecution had basically been told by the judge, if you try to introduce this ghost story as evidence, I will throw it out. I will throw it out on the grounds of trying to lead the jurors and slander against Mr. Shu. I don't know a lot about courtroom procedure. I don't know how things like this are supposed to work. But one, why would the defense introduce something that the prosecution was essentially banned from using? And 2, even if she was deemed an absolute loon and was to be taken from the courthouse straight to Weston, that wouldn't dismiss any circumstantial evidence. I have no idea why the defense decided to do this. And Elva's mother went into great detail describing the visits from the ghost and the conversations that she had with the ghost. Things only got worse for Mr. Shu when he was called to the stand, and he basically just denied all the evidence presented against him, didn't provide any kind of defense or alibi, and basically just made a jerk out of himself. It took the jury about an hour to sentence Mr. Shu to life in prison, and he was sent to the Moundsville State Penitentiary, and I believe he passed away 3 or 4 years later due to a health epidemic that was going through the penitentiary. And the ghost of Elva was never seen again. There are transcripts and reports from this trial to this day. I'll link some below. And that is the story of West Virginia's most well-documented ghost story, that if you live in West Virginia, you might have heard about. You might have briefly heard about it as like a fact of the day if you live anywhere else in the country. And it's probably one of the weirdest trials in West Virginia history, maybe even United States history. And don't forget to stay wild, stay wonderful. Welcome to West Virginia.